It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Jake Matthews' life was thrown into a whirlwind of chaos. One moment, he was just another mechanic at a small-town garage, scraping by to cover his bills. The next, he was standing face to face with an unimaginable twist of fate. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows over the dirt road outside the garage. The air was hot, dry, and heavy with the scent of oil and rust. It was like any other afternoon for Jake, who had spent the last 8 years under the hood of cars, fixing engines, replacing parts, and barely scraping enough together to keep food on the table. Life had been a grind, but it was his grind. He had no complaints, really. He worked hard, and though he sometimes daydreamed about a better life, he didn't expect anything extraordinary to ever happen to him. Not in a town like this, with its dusty streets and people who never left, never changed. Everything stayed the same, and that was how Jake liked it. Jake's shift was almost over when the sound of screeching tires cut through the peaceful hum of the afternoon. It wasn't unusual to hear a car or truck zoom past the garage. This town was small, but it had its fair share of speeders. But this sound was different. It was sharp, desperate. Jake shot a glance toward the window, squinting against the harsh sunlight. The sound of screeching tires turned into a violent crash. His stomach lurched as a cloud of dust billowed up in the air. Without thinking, Jake dropped his wrench and bolted out the door. The scene that greeted him was enough to make his heart stop. A sleek black car had veered off the road, its front end crumpled against a tree at a horrible angle. The windshield was shattered, and a thin trail of smoke curled from under the hood. It was a high-end car, the kind you'd expect to see in a city, not on a dirt road in a small town. Jake hesitated for only a second before sprinting towards it. When he reached the wreck, the car's door was still slightly ajar. He could hear faint, muffled groaning from inside. Jake's heart raced. He didn't even check for other cars on the road. His instinct screamed at him to act. He reached for the door, wrenching it open with surprising ease. Inside, a young woman lay slumped in the driver's seat, her face pale and bloodied. Her eyes were closed, and her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, as if each one was a struggle. Jake's mind raced, but his body moved on autopilot. He had no training in first aid, no expertise in trauma. He was just a regular guy who fixed cars for a living. But this woman, whoever she was, needed help. Fast. Without thinking, he grabbed the woman's shoulders and gently but firmly pulled her out of the car, cradling her against him as he placed her on the ground. She groaned again, and Jake could see the blood seeping from a gash on her forehead, a deep cut that was bleeding heavily. Panic surged through him, but he forced it down. He had to do something. Reaching into his pocket, he fumbled for his phone, dialed 911, and in a calm but urgent voice, explained the situation. As he spoke to the operator, he kept one hand on the woman's chest, monitoring her breathing, and trying his best to keep her awake. The moments that followed were a blur. He could hear the distant sound of sirens wailing, but they seemed impossibly far away. The woman's body was limp, but her pulse, thank God, was steady. Jake didn't know how long he knelt there, his hand pressed against her chest, waiting for help to arrive. It felt like hours, though he knew it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. When the ambulance finally pulled up, Jake stood up, stepping back to let the paramedics take over. They were efficient, working quickly, but their faces showed surprise when they saw the woman's condition. One of them turned to Jake, her face softening with recognition. "You saved her life," she said, her voice calm but tinged with gratitude. "If you hadn't acted when you did." Jake nodded, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't interested in accolades or recognition. He just knew that he'd done what he had to do. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked. The paramedic nodded. "She'll be fine. You got her here in time." The woman's injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. The paramedics had stabilized her, and soon she was loaded into the ambulance, on her way to the hospital. Jake watched them go, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. It was only when they were out of sight that he realized what he had done. He'd saved a life. But who was she? Why was she driving out here, alone, on this desolate road? Jake stood there for a moment longer, the weight of the situation sinking in. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his boss, asking if he was ready to clock out. Jake glanced at the time. He had just witnessed something life-changing, and yet, the world around him was moving forward as if nothing had happened. He walked back to the garage, shaking his head, and texted his boss that he was heading out. He couldn't concentrate after what had just happened. As he walked toward his truck, he noticed something strange. There was a car parked at the edge of the lot, a black sedan that looked strikingly similar to the one that had crashed earlier. He approached it cautiously, wondering if it was just a coincidence. He saw the back door open, and a woman stepped out, dressed in an expensive-looking suit, her hair styled in a way that screamed wealth and privilege. "Excuse me," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "You're the one who helped my daughter, right?" Jake was taken aback. "Your daughter," he repeated, struggling to make the connection. "Yes," the woman said, her eyes narrowing slightly as if appraising him. "Sophia McAllister. You saved her life today." Sophia McAllister. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but Jake didn't pay much attention to the wealthy families around town. They kept to themselves, and Jake was content to leave them to their world. "I didn't know who she was," Jake muttered, scratching the back of his head. "I just saw someone in trouble, and I helped. That's all." The woman's lips twitched into a smile, though it wasn't one of amusement. "I understand. You're a good man, Mr. Matthews. My name is Margaret McAllister, and my family owes you everything." She glanced around briefly, as if weighing her next words. "I'd like to offer you a reward, for your kindness and quick thinking." Jake looked at her, feeling a strange unease. He wasn't interested in money or any reward. "I didn't do it for a reward," he said flatly. "I did what anyone would do." Margaret seemed to consider this for a moment, and then nodded slowly. "I respect that. But we still owe you. You're a hero in our eyes." She handed him a business card. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Jake glanced at the card. The McAllister family was well known in the town, and their wealth was legendary. But Jake didn't care about that. What mattered was that he had saved a life. He gave a nod, pocketed the card, and walked back to his truck. The encounter with Margaret McAllister felt like a strange echo of a life he had never thought possible, a life that might now be pulling him into its orbit. He didn't expect anything more to come of it, but the seed had been planted. That night, as he lay in bed, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the woman he had saved. Who was she really? What did her family do? What did this all mean for him? Little did he know that this seemingly random act of kindness would set into motion a series of events that would turn his quiet, ordinary life upside down forever. The following days passed in a blur for Jake. The adrenaline of the rescue faded, but the ripple effect from his actions seemed to linger, quietly yet insistently, in the back of his mind. Every time he stepped into the mechanic shop, he noticed people eyeing him a little differently, as though his life had taken on a new significance that he wasn't entirely ready for. His colleagues at the shop mentioned it too, how his heroism had made it to the local news, with headlines like, "Local Mechanic Saves Billionaire's Daughter in Shocking Accident." Jake wasn't sure how to feel about it. He didn't want the attention. He didn't want to be a local hero. In his mind, he was just doing what anyone with a shred of decency would do, helping someone in need. But the more he heard people talk about it, the more he realized how much this could change things for him, whether he wanted it to or not. On the 5th day after the accident, Jake decided to visit the local cafe for a quick coffee before heading into work. He'd been feeling the weight of the last few days more than usual, the uncomfortable attention slowly building around him. As he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, and a few heads turned in his direction. He tried to ignore it, heading straight to the counter where the barista, Lisa, gave him a smile. "Jake Matthews, the man of the hour," she said, a teasing glint in her eye. "How's the hero life treating you?" Jake half smiled, shaking his head. "I didn't do anything special, Lisa. Just helped someone who needed it." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't know. Saving the daughter of the McAllisters? That's not exactly just helping. You're kind of a big deal now." He muttered a quiet thanks, paid for his coffee, and sat down at the back table. He wanted to enjoy his coffee in peace, but it was impossible to shake the feeling of eyes on him. His phone buzzed with notifications, all from local news outlets and even a few social media platforms asking for interviews. He'd managed to ignore most of them so far, but the curiosity was beginning to eat at him. Just as he was about to check his messages, the door opened again. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Mind if I join you?" The voice was unmistakable, calm but carrying a weight of authority. Jake looked up to find Sophia standing there, dressed in a simple white blouse and jeans, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. Despite her casual appearance, there was an unmistakable air of grace about her, something that made her stand out even in a room full of people. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention without even trying. Jake hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure." She slid into the seat across from him, her eyes scanning the cafe briefly before settling on him. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said softly. Jake shook his head. "Not at all. Just thinking." Sophia smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes completely. "About what?" Jake sighed, setting his coffee down. "Everything. The whole thing with the accident, the way people are talking about it. It feels weird. I didn't do it for recognition. I don't want to be the town hero or anything." Sophia leaned in slightly, her expression serious. "You're not. You're just a man who did something good. And that's rare. You may not want the attention, but the truth is, you saved my life. People don't forget that." Jake looked down at his hands, uncomfortable with the attention, but also strangely grateful for her understanding. "I didn't do it for you to owe me anything, Sophia. I just did what felt right." "I know," she said quietly. "But sometimes the universe has a funny way of connecting people." Her voice trailed off, as if she were thinking of something deeper, something personal. The pause hung between them for a moment, but Sophia quickly recovered. "I wanted to thank you again, Jake. Properly this time. I don't think a thank you is enough, but it's all I can offer right now." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to him. "This is for you. A token of my gratitude." Jake stared at the envelope, then back at her. "Sophia, I didn't save you for money or anything. I don't need a reward." Sophia smiled faintly, her eyes warm but distant. "I know. But my family, they don't let anything go unpaid. And honestly, I don't know any other way to thank you. So, please, take it. It's important to me." Reluctantly, Jake took the envelope. Inside was a check, written for an amount so large, it made his heart skip a beat. He swallowed hard, staring at the numbers as though they were written in another language. It was an absurd amount, more money than he had seen in his entire life, and certainly more than he would ever need. "I can't take this," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't what I want." Sophia's face tightened just slightly, and she sat back in her chair. "Jake, you can't just refuse what's been offered. My family is known for, well, for being generous. And it's not just money. It's a way of showing appreciation." Jake looked up, his gaze catching hers. "What's this really about, Sophia? I didn't do anything special. You were in trouble, and I helped. End of story." She looked at him for a long moment, almost as if she were searching for something. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer. "It's not just about what you did that day, Jake. It's about the way you did it. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask questions. You just acted. That kind of thing, it doesn't happen every day. Not even in my world." Jake felt a strange tug in his chest. She was right, of course. He hadn't hesitated to help her. But the more he thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Why had she, of all people, needed someone like him? She could have had any number of people helping her. There were probably doctors, lawyers, and wealthy professionals who would have dropped everything to help. So why him? Sophia watched his conflicted expression for a while, then nodded slowly. "I get it, Jake. You're not the type of guy who wants to be pulled into the world of wealth and privilege. But sometimes, the world has a funny way of pulling people into its orbit. You've done something for me, and now, maybe it's time for me to return the favor." Jake swallowed hard, trying to ignore the rush of unease that surged through him. "I'm not looking for favors. I'm just a regular guy." Sophia smiled, a flicker of something warm in her eyes. "Exactly. And that's why I think you're exactly what I need." Before Jake could ask what she meant, Sophia stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "I'll leave you to think about it," she said. "But I'd love to talk more soon. If you ever change your mind about everything." With that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving Jake with the check and a million questions swirling in his mind. He sat there, staring at the piece of paper that could change everything, his mind racing. What had just happened? And more importantly, what was Sophia's game? As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But he had no choice. He was already caught in her world, whether he liked it or not. Jake couldn't stop thinking about that envelope. The check inside was heavy in his pocket, a constant reminder of the strange encounter with Sophia McAllister. For days, the piece of paper seemed to burn a hole in his mind, and no matter how hard he tried to push it out of his thoughts, it kept creeping back in. He had spent his life in this small town, surrounded by people who knew him, knew his struggles, his failures, and his modest dreams. He was a mechanic, just a regular guy trying to make a living. But now, his life had been irrevocably tied to the McAllisters, a family whose wealth and influence were known across the entire region. He was out of his depth, and that made him uneasy. The morning after Sophia's visit to the cafe, Jake decided to take the check to the bank. He had already made up his mind to refuse the money, to walk away from it without a second thought. But as he stood in line at the teller, staring down at the check in his hand, doubt began to creep in. The amount on the check was staggering, more than he could ever dream of making in a lifetime of work. It wasn't just money, it was a chance. A chance to escape the grind, to break free from the suffocating weight of his daily existence. But was that the right thing to do? Could he really accept money from a stranger, a billionaire's daughter, after what had happened? Was he betraying his own values by even considering it? By the time it was his turn to approach the counter, Jake had made his decision. He handed the check to the teller, his heart racing. "I'd like to deposit this into my account," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The teller eyed the check for a moment, her eyebrows lifting slightly at the figure written on it. She glanced at Jake, as if wondering if he was truly aware of what he was holding. "Is this your check, sir?" she asked cautiously. Jake nodded, trying to suppress his anxiety. "Yes. It's from he paused, unsure how to explain. "It's from a friend." The teller didn't seem convinced, but she didn't question him further. She processed the check quickly, but before she handed him the receipt, she hesitated. "I just want to make sure everything is in order. This is a rather large sum, and, well, we like to ensure that everything is legitimate." Jake's stomach dropped. He didn't need anyone to remind him of how out of place he felt in this world. But as he stood there, waiting for her to finish, he realized that the check wasn't just about money. It was about power. A power that Sophia, and by extension, her family, could wield over him. A power he wasn't sure he wanted. But there was no turning back now. The deposit was made, and the money was his, whether he liked it or not. Later that afternoon, as Jake stood by the car lift in the shop, he was deep in thought. He hadn't told anyone about the check or his encounter with Sophia. It wasn't that he didn't trust his colleagues, it was just that he wasn't sure how to explain it. To them, he was the mechanic, the guy who worked on their cars and listened to their gripes. They didn't need to know the kind of world he had suddenly been thrust into. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled it out of his pocket and saw that it was a message from an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, he opened it. "Jake, it's Sophia. I hope you've had a chance to think about what I said. I would really like to talk to you. There's something important we need to discuss. Please let me know when you're free." Jake stared at the message for a long moment. He didn't want to get tangled up in whatever web the McAllisters were weaving, but there was no denying that Sophia had been persistent. Her offer was tempting, yes, but what did she really want from him? Why was she so interested in a guy like him? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't seeing, something bigger than what appeared on the surface. Against his better judgment, Jake replied. "Okay. I'm free tomorrow afternoon. What did you want to talk about?" The response came almost instantly, "Great. I'll pick you up at 2. I'll explain everything when I see you. I promise it'll make sense." Jake's mind raced as he stared at the screen. What had he just agreed to? He had no idea, but something told him that he couldn't back out now. There was too much at stake, too much that he needed to understand. So, he steeled himself for whatever was coming. The next day, at precisely 2 o'clock, Sophia arrived at the garage. She drove a sleek black sedan, the same model as the one she had crashed just days before. When she stepped out of the car, she was wearing a dark blue dress that looked effortlessly elegant, but there was an edge to her appearance that spoke of power and control. Jake couldn't help but feel out of place standing in front of her, his oil-stained clothes and rough hands a stark contrast to her polished look. "Ready to talk?" she asked, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Jake nodded, pushing his hands into his pockets. "I guess so." Sophia smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good. Let's go somewhere quiet. There's a lot I need to explain." She led him to her car, and for a moment, Jake hesitated. He was about to step into a world he had no understanding of, a world where money, status, and influence controlled everything. But he had already made his choice, and now, there was no turning back. As they drove through the town, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to unfold. He didn't know what it was, but the intensity in Sophia's gaze told him that he was about to learn something that would change the course of his life. She had been kind to him, even grateful, but there was something deeper, something unspoken, beneath her words. He had saved her life, but what did that really mean for him? After a few minutes of driving, they reached a quiet park on the edge of town. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind filled the air as Sophia parked the car and turned to face Jake. "This place is peaceful," she said, her eyes distant. "I thought it would be a good spot to talk." Jake didn't respond, just nodded as he followed her to a bench beneath a large oak tree. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of them. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "Jake, I'm going to be honest with you. My family is extremely powerful. We have resources, connections, and influence that most people can't even begin to imagine. But I'm not interested in money. Not in the way most people think. Jake looked at her, confused. Then what do you want from me? Sophia took a deep breath, her gaze locking onto his. What I want is simple. I need someone who isn't tainted by the world I come from. I need someone who can see things clearly, someone who can make decisions with a level head. Someone like you. Jake's heart raced as he processed her words. What was she asking of him? What did she need him for? She leaned closer, her voice low and serious. Jake, I'm asking you to trust me. My family's empire is crumbling, and I need someone who can help me rebuild it. Someone who isn't blinded by wealth, someone who understands what really matters. Jake was stunned. He had no idea what he was walking into, but Sophia's eyes were filled with something that made him pause. She wasn't asking him for money or resources, she was asking for his mind, his integrity, his perspective. He thought about his life. The constant struggle. The dead-end job. The crushing weight of living paycheck to paycheck. What could he do? Should he step into this world of power and wealth? Could he really help her rebuild everything? Jake sat back, staring at the horizon. His life, his ordinary, predictable life, had just collided with something bigger, something dangerous. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't deny that part of him was drawn to it, drawn to the possibility of something more. But was he ready to gamble everything for a chance at something he didn't fully understand? Would he be willing to sacrifice everything he knew for a future that was uncertain, that was filled with people like Sophia and her family? He had no answers. Only questions. And for the first time in his life, those questions seemed to matter more than anything else. Jake sat in stunned silence, processing Sophia's words, the weight of the decision slowly sinking in. Her offer was both intriguing and terrifying, a path that promised untold opportunities but also came with risks he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Everything he had known, everything that had shaped him, was now being questioned. Was he willing to walk away from his life as a mechanic, from the community that had been his entire world, and step into a realm of wealth, power, and influence? Could he really be the person Sophia needed? The person her family could rely on? The silence between them grew thick, but Sophia didn't rush him. She let him think, her gaze steady but patient, as if waiting for him to make up his mind. Jake glanced at her, seeing the earnestness in her expression, the sincerity in her eyes that told him she wasn't playing a game. She meant what she said, this wasn't some elaborate scheme. She was offering him a chance to join her world, but not just as a bystander. She needed him, in some way that was still unclear to him. After a long while, Jake finally spoke, his voice hesitant but growing more certain with each word. I don't know what to say, Sophia. You're talking about a whole different world. A world I don't even know how to navigate. He paused, rubbing his hand over his face. I've always had a simple life. I've never wanted more than I could work for, you know? Never thought of things beyond this garage and the people here. This whole offer, it's overwhelming. Sophia's eyes softened, and she nodded, as if she had anticipated his hesitation. I get it. I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. But I do need someone who's not just going to go along with everything because it seems like the easy way. I need someone who'll challenge me, question everything, and see the truth for what it is, not what it seems on the surface. Jake let her words sink in. He had always prided himself on his ability to think for himself, on his refusal to be swayed by what others thought or expected. But this wasn't just about being an independent mechanic anymore. This was about stepping into a world where every decision had far-reaching consequences, where loyalty and ambition would be tested, and where his every move could be scrutinized by people who had the power to shape or break him. Sophia's voice brought him back to the present. Jake, I don't expect you to say yes right now. I just want you to know what's at stake. There are people in my family who are looking for someone to help with the business. They want someone who's grounded, someone who won't be blinded by the money or the status, someone who'll actually make decisions with integrity. My father, he's in trouble. And if things don't change soon, everything could come crashing down. The mention of her father caught Jake off guard. He had assumed that Sophia was the one driving this, the one with the plan. But hearing about her father's troubles, the weight of it all, made things clearer. This wasn't just about her. It was about a whole family in turmoil, about a dynasty on the brink of collapse. Sophia needed someone who could step in and help, but it was bigger than just her. It was about saving a legacy, something that could be destroyed if the right decisions weren't made. Jake looked at her, his mind spinning. You're talking about some serious stuff here. You said your father is in trouble. What exactly does that mean? Is he in financial trouble? Legal trouble? His voice was laced with concern. He had never been involved in anything like that before, but now it seemed like everything was connected in ways he couldn't have predicted. Sophia exhaled slowly, her expression serious. It's both. There are financial issues, yes, but there's also a lot of internal conflict within the family. My father's business dealings have attracted the wrong kind of attention, and now there are people, powerful people, trying to take everything from us. There are factions inside the family who want to see him fail. And the pressure, it's been too much for him. The weight of her words settled heavily on Jake's shoulders. This wasn't just a simple offer. It was a cry for help, a plea for someone with fresh eyes and the courage to step into a situation that seemed beyond redemption. Sophia wasn't just asking him to join her in a life of luxury and power, she was asking him to help save her family, her legacy, and everything they had worked for. She was asking him to be the one who could navigate a dangerous landscape of corporate rivalries, family secrets, and personal betrayal. Jake's mind raced as he processed the magnitude of what she was asking. Was he really the person for this job? Could someone like him, a guy who had spent his life fixing cars and keeping his head down, really step into this world and make a difference? He wasn't sure. The idea of it was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know what to say, he muttered, his gaze fixed on the ground. This is all so much. I never asked for any of this. I never thought any of this would happen to me. Sophia reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. I know this is a lot. But Jake, sometimes life doesn't give you a choice. Sometimes, the path you're supposed to walk isn't the one you'd pick for yourself. But this is bigger than both of us. It's not just about you and me. It's about everything that's at stake. My family, my father, they need someone like you. Someone who isn't blinded by the power, someone who can see the truth behind the lies. Jake looked up, meeting her gaze. There was an intensity in her eyes, a pleading, an urgency. He could see the weight of the situation in her face. This wasn't just a business opportunity for her, it was a lifeline. And in that moment, Jake realized something he hadn't wanted to admit before: he was the lifeline she needed. Whether he was ready or not, he had already been pulled into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The question that had been hanging in his mind for days now burned more fiercely than ever: could he really do this? Could he truly step into this new world and help turn things around? The idea of it terrified him, but at the same time, it stirred something deep within him, a sense of purpose, of possibility. Sophia broke the silence again, her voice softer this time. You don't have to decide now. But know this: whether you join me or not, I'll always be grateful for what you did. No one else stepped in that day. You did. And that's something that won't be forgotten. Jake took a deep breath, looking around the quiet park, as if searching for some kind of sign. The world seemed still, suspended in time, as if waiting for him to make a choice that would change everything. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. "I'll do it. I'll help you. I don't know how much good I'll be, but I'll try." Sophia's face softened with relief, and she smiled, her eyes bright with something he hadn't seen before, hope. "Thank you, Jake. You don't know what this means." As they sat there in silence, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. He had no idea what lay ahead, he had no idea what kind of trouble he was about to step into. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. The next chapter of his story was beginning, and it was far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. Jake's decision to step into the McAllister world was a turning point he would never be able to undo, no matter how much he sometimes wished he could. At first, everything felt like a dream, a sudden plunge into an ocean of wealth, power, and influence that seemed far removed from the mechanic's shop and the small town he had called home for so long. Sophia, though seemingly composed and in control, had let Jake into her family's inner workings, showing him the cracks in their polished, high-society world. What she had warned him about, the deep-seated problems within her family, were only just beginning to reveal themselves, and Jake was now part of that story, whether he was ready or not. Over the next few weeks, Jake found himself thrown into a whirlwind of meetings, conferences, and high-stakes decisions. Sophia had kept her word. She didn't ask for anything immediately, but she kept bringing him into her world, letting him shadow her during family discussions, business meetings, and even social gatherings. What stood out to him the most was how much was happening behind closed doors, things no one spoke of in public but were simmering beneath the surface, threatening to tear apart everything they had built. There was talk of hostile takeovers, mergers, and alliances that were anything but friendly. There were rivals, some inside the McAllister family itself, who would stop at nothing to push her father out of power. Jake wasn't equipped for any of this. Sure, he had learned how to fix a broken engine, how to navigate the mechanics of a car, but this? This was a whole different kind of machine. The power plays, the manipulation, the calculated risks, it was all overwhelming. But each day, as he observed Sophia and her family, he began to understand the stakes in a way he never had before. Her father, a towering figure in the corporate world, was struggling. Age was catching up to him, and his decisions were becoming more erratic. Jake saw the fear in Sophia's eyes during their private conversations, saw how deeply her father's deterioration was affecting her. She had the intelligence, the ambition, the will, but she was fighting against an empire that had been built on a different set of values than her own. It wasn't just about saving the family business anymore. It was about saving her father, about salvaging her family's legacy, and about trying to prevent a collapse that could bring down everything they had worked for. One evening, as Jake sat in the McAllister family's grand estate, sipping wine with a few of Sophia's closest advisors, the conversation took a sharp turn. They were discussing a potential merger with a rival corporation, a move that would guarantee the McAllisters a stronger position in the market, but at a cost. Jake was listening intently, but the weight of his decision began to feel even heavier. There were things happening here that didn't sit right with him. People who were far more calculating and ruthless than he had ever known existed. He wasn't naive, he had grown up around tough people, but this was something else. It wasn't just business, it was personal, and the personal stakes were just as high. At the dinner table, one of Sophia's distant relatives, a young man named Trevor, began to speak in a way that made Jake's skin crawl. Trevor had always struck Jake as too smooth, too eager to please. His sharp smile and too polished demeanor made him seem like someone who would say anything to get ahead. And tonight, that's exactly what he did. "Jake," Trevor said, turning to him as if he had just been waiting for an opportunity to speak. "I know this is all new to you, but you need to understand something. This isn't just about keeping the family business intact. It's about winning. About outsmarting everyone else who wants to take what's rightfully ours." His eyes gleamed with ambition. "Sometimes, in order to get what you want, you have to play dirty. You can't afford to be soft. Jake felt a chill run through him. Trevor's words were sharp, cutting into the atmosphere like a blade. There was no warmth in them, no empathy. Just cold ambition. I'm not sure I understand, Jake said, keeping his voice steady. What exactly are you saying? Trevor's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm saying that this isn't a game, Jake. If you want to be part of this world, you need to stop being a bystander. You need to start thinking like a winner. The McAllisters didn't get to where they are by playing fair. And neither should you. Jake's heart raced, his thoughts spinning. He had never been the type to play games, especially not games that involved betraying people or cutting corners. He knew there were tough decisions to be made, but the direction Trevor was pushing seemed wrong. It seemed like everything Sophia had warned him about was starting to become a reality. This wasn't about preserving integrity or family, it was about power. It was about survival. And at that moment, Jake wondered if he was strong enough to face the consequences of the choices he was being asked to make. Later that evening, as the guests began to filter out and the house grew quieter, Jake found himself alone with Sophia in the grand hallway. She looked exhausted, her expression drawn and tired, as if the weight of the world was sitting squarely on her shoulders. She caught his eye, and for a moment, they simply stood there, silent, as if both of them were waiting for the other to speak first. Finally, Jake broke the silence. You know, I never thought I'd be part of something like this. I've worked hard my whole life, but this? This is a whole different world. I'm not sure I'm cut out for it. Sophia's gaze softened, and she walked closer to him, her voice low but full of sincerity. Jake, I didn't bring you here to change who you are. I brought you here because I believe in you. You see things differently, and that's exactly what we need. My family is drowning in power struggles, in deceit. What I'm asking from you isn't about playing dirty. It's about saving what's left, and sometimes, that means making hard choices. The truth is, I don't have anyone else I can trust to help me. Jake nodded, but the uncertainty was still there, gnawing at him. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Sophia. I've seen what your family is willing to do to win. And I don't know if I can play by those rules. Sophia's eyes flickered with something close to understanding. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to play by their rules, Jake. But sometimes, you have to decide what you're willing to fight for. Are you willing to stand by me? To fight for something that actually matters? For the first time in days, Jake felt a sense of clarity. He had been wrestling with the idea of playing in a world where power meant everything, where people were willing to crush anything in their path to get what they wanted. But now, looking at Sophia, he realized something. She wasn't like them. She wasn't just seeking power for the sake of it. She was fighting for something deeper, something more meaningful. She was fighting for her family, for their legacy, and for the truth. As he stood there in the quiet of the hallway, Jake made his decision. He wasn't going to let the world of wealth and power corrupt him. He wasn't going to let it change who he was or what he believed in. But he was going to help Sophia. He was going to stand by her and fight, not for money or influence, but for something that actually mattered. I'll fight with you, Sophia, he said, his voice firm, a resolve settling deep inside him. But we're going to do this our way, the right way. No shortcuts. Sophia's expression softened, and a genuine smile tugged at the corners of her lips. For the first time since this all began, Jake felt like he was finally where he was meant to be. The battle ahead would be harder than anything he had ever faced, but he wasn't alone. Together, they would navigate the storm ahead, and no matter what happened, Jake knew one thing for sure: he was going to fight for what was right. The weeks that followed Jake's decision to stand by Sophia were a whirlwind of strategy meetings, tense family discussions, and unexpected challenges. What started as a reluctant partnership quickly evolved into a full-blown mission to save the McAllister legacy. But the further Jake delved into this world, the more he realized just how deep the problems ran and how dangerous the people were who had a stake in keeping things as they were. Sophia was right about one thing: Jake had a unique perspective. His outsider's view of the McAllister family dynamic, combined with his unyielding sense of integrity, made him an invaluable asset to her. Every time they met to discuss the state of the business or the hostile takeover attempts, Sophia would listen to his thoughts, challenging the assumptions that her advisors had made. His straightforward thinking, free from the weight of power games, allowed him to see things from angles others didn't even consider. He was no corporate guru, but he could tell when something didn't sit right. Despite his growing involvement, Jake continued to feel like a fish out of water. His life had been simple. A mechanic's work was honest, straightforward, and concrete, fixing engines and solving problems that had clear solutions. But in this world of billion-dollar deals, stock manipulation, and power plays, things weren't so clear. Every decision seemed to carry unimaginable consequences. One mistake could spell disaster not just for Sophia and her family, but for the thousands of employees who depended on them. But he had made his choice. He wasn't backing out now. He was determined to help, no matter how difficult it got. One evening, as Jake sat in the family's sprawling library, reviewing a set of financial documents that made no sense to him at first glance, Sophia entered the room. Her face was drawn, the usual fire in her eyes replaced by a deep, unshakable exhaustion. The pressure of everything was starting to wear on her, and Jake could see it. "Jake," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of something she hadn't shared before. She paused, looking down at the papers in his hands before sitting down beside him. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Every day it's getting harder. My father, he's not the man he used to be. The pressure is crushing him, and every move we make feels like a gamble." Jake looked up at her, his heart tightening. "Sophia, you're stronger than you know. You've been holding this all together for so long. It's not easy, but you don't have to carry it alone. I'm here." He hesitated, then added, "We'll figure this out." She nodded slowly, but the burden on her shoulders was too heavy for just words to lift. "You don't know what it's like, Jake. To constantly have to make these impossible decisions. The weight of my family's expectations, the constant threats, the deals that go south. It's not just about saving the business anymore. It's about saving my father's legacy, keeping my family intact. But I don't know if we can do it. And if we fail," she trailed off, her words unspoken but loud in the quiet of the room. Jake could hear the fear in her voice, despite the walls she had built around it. He understood more than she knew. He hadn't been a part of this world long enough to know all the intricacies, but he did know one thing: when it came down to the people you loved, everything else faded into the background. This wasn't about business or money anymore. It was about family, and no one was going to tear it apart, not if he had anything to say about it. "You don't have to do this alone, Sophia," Jake repeated, his voice steady now. "We'll figure this out together. There are still people who want to see this family succeed, people who believe in what your father built. We'll find a way. I'll help you." Sophia smiled faintly, her exhaustion still evident but softened by his words. "Thank you, Jake. You've already done more than anyone else. I don't know where this path is leading." Before Jake could respond, the door to the library opened abruptly, and Trevor, Sophia's ambitious cousin, stepped inside, a cocky grin plastered on his face. The tension in the room immediately thickened. Jake didn't trust Trevor, not even a little. There was something about him that rubbed Jake the wrong way, a sense of entitlement and hunger that was all too obvious. "Everything okay in here?" Trevor asked, his eyes flicking between Jake and Sophia with a knowing look. Sophia's smile faltered for just a moment. "Yes, Trevor. Just discussing some of the financial reports. We're fine." Trevor's gaze lingered on Jake before he smirked. I wouldn't get too comfortable, Jake. You're not really cut out for this world, you know? He said it with a casual air, but Jake could hear the undercurrent of malice in his words. Jake stood up, his chair scraping sharply against the floor. I'm here to help, Trevor. I'm not trying to take anyone's place. He kept his voice calm, but a cold fire sparked inside him. Trevor was trying to bait him, and Jake wasn't about to take the bait. Trevor's grin widened, clearly enjoying the tension. We'll see how long that lasts. Don't get too comfortable. This world, it's not for people like you. You don't belong here, and sooner or later, you'll realize it. Sophia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak up. Jake didn't expect her to. She was used to these games, used to the subtle digs that Trevor loved to make, trying to assert his dominance over everyone else. But Jake wasn't going to let him get away with it. I'm here because I believe in this family, Trevor. Believe it or not, that's more than you can say. So, if you've got something to say, say it. But don't think for a second that I'll back down just because you don't like me. Trevor's grin faltered, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, anger, maybe, or fear. Whatever it was, it made Jake feel like he had made his point. Trevor may have been used to bullying people into submission, but Jake wasn't one of them. After a tense silence, Trevor gave a short laugh, clearly trying to regain his composure. All right. Just remember, you don't want to get caught in the middle of things that don't concern you. With that, he turned on his heel and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Sophia let out a long breath and turned to Jake, a conflicted expression on her face. Don't let him get to you, Jake. He's just trying to get under your skin. But, it's only a matter of time before he tries something worse. Jake shook his head. I'm not worried about Trevor. If he's got a problem with me, that's his issue. We've got bigger things to worry about. He was done playing defense. Now, it was time to go on the offensive. Sophia nodded, a trace of gratitude in her eyes. You're right. And I'm glad you're here. I can't do this without you. The days that followed were filled with mounting pressure. The McAllister family's business dealings were growing more complicated by the minute, and the threats against them, both from inside and outside the family, were escalating. Every decision they made felt like walking a tightrope, each one potentially leading to disaster. But Jake was no longer just a bystander. He had become part of this fight, and he was determined to see it through. Each day, as he worked alongside Sophia, he realized that this wasn't just about saving the family business anymore. It was about something far deeper. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against them. It was about loyalty, integrity, and the strength to fight for what you believed in, no matter how tough the battle. The stakes had never been higher, but Jake was no longer afraid. He had made his choice, and now, there was no turning back. The battle for the McAllister legacy was far from over, but Jake was ready. No matter what Trevor, or anyone else, threw at them, they were going to face it together. And for the first time, Jake felt certain that they could win.